Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome all viewers. Inshallah, today I will be responding to a video that was posted by Daniel HAQIQATJOU entitled Sajid Lipum and the Madkhali Virus. Now, one thing I try to do in these videos is, even if there is some sort of a refutation, some sort of a back and forth with an individual, I want the video to be educational. I want it to be beneficial. I want to teach some sort of foundational principle regarding the religion of Islam. So I ask that Allah make this beneficial and give us ikhlas and guide us to the truth. And I think one main benefit that we can use for this video is regarding the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which he said, "Whoever has the following 4 characteristics will be a pure hypocrite. And whoever has one of the following 4 characteristics will have one characteristic of hypocrisy unless and until he gives it up. Number 1, whenever he is entrusted, he betrays. Number 2, whenever he speaks, he tells a lie. Number 3, whenever he makes a covenant, he proves treacherous. And number 4, whenever he quarrels, he behaves in a very imprudent, evil, and insulting manner." Now, when it comes to this issue with Daniel, I never went into the specifics regarding why I disassociated and I distanced myself from him. I never wanted to be pushed to the point where I needed to make a video like the one I'm making right now. However, due to the fact that Daniel has been constantly portraying 2 of the aforementioned characteristics, namely lying and being insulting when he quarrels with people,
the Salaf were not bootlickers like you.
It has become crucial that I clarify the truth, because people are confused and people are being misled by his deception. So let's begin by showing how this entire situation, this entire hour-long video, as well as so much of the rhetoric and back and forth that has been occurring with Daniel over the past few weeks, is completely based on a blatant lie. Daniel has repeated over and over and over again the idea that this whole situation stems from the fact that he saw something evil happening, namely in Saudi Arabia, namely the celebration of Halloween. And all that he did was he spoke out against that. He was fulfilling the obligation of enjoining good and forbidding evil. But once he did that, all of these people started disassociating from him and calling him a khariji, who's a dog of the hellfire and whose blood is halal. People who he has called
madkhalis, or bootlickers, agents of governments.
And this is what he's spreading to the people to make it seem like he is this innocent individual who is wrongly being attacked by
bootlickers.
Now, this is a blatant lie on multiple levels that Daniel keeps repeating. I actually took my videos of Daniel down on October 23rd, which was a week before Halloween. Omar Shatila even tweeted 5 days before Halloween saying, "Now that Daniel has become open with his views and has been frequently promoting such deviations recently, Sajid has disassociated himself from him completely and is not promoting him at all anymore." So as you can see, this false narrative that Daniel just condemned Halloween in Saudi Arabia, and then people are so in love with the Saudi government that they all just started calling him a khariji and denouncing him and running away and acting frantic. It's a complete lie. People have had issues and concerns regarding Daniel for years, way before he ever said anything about Halloween. And the straw that ultimately broke the camel's back for me was this post that he made on his Telegram group on October 23rd. This isn't my only issue with Daniel or things that he's said or done over the years. However, all of those things combined with the dishonesty and the just foul immaturity and name-calling led to a point where I felt obliged to distance myself, because people associate me with Daniel. They've been associating me with him for years. They assume that I have the same views as him regarding everything. So I tried to make it very clear. I agree with him about certain specific things that I've mentioned in the past. However, now the direction that he's going with his dawah, I don't want to be associated with him anymore, and I want to make that clear to everyone so that there's no confusion. So as we can see in the post, Daniel is sharing a screenshot of an article from Arab News. It's about yoga being practiced in Saudi Arabia. And Daniel says, "I hope all the true followers of the Salaf show their support for the ruler by sending their wives and daughters to these events. Anyone who doesn't send his wives and daughters is a khariji dog." So as I said, in posts like this, which are not rare at all whatsoever when it comes to Daniel, is filled with dishonesty and childish immaturity and name-calling. I understand this post is drenched in sarcasm. That doesn't change the fact that he's lying and he's misrepresenting people who are trying to follow the Salaf. Nobody who claims to follow the Salaf says that you have to support the ruler in sending their wives and daughters to do yoga. And surely none of them say that anyone who doesn't send their wives or daughters to such an event is a khariji dog. This sort of speech in misrepresenting Muslims who are trying to follow the Sunnah, as well as joking about labeling people khariji dogs, is unbefitting of a Muslim, let alone somebody who is seen to be a representative of Islam, a teacher, somebody giving dawah. And somebody who constantly acts like this is not somebody that I want to promote or be associated with. He goes on to have this childish, imaginary dialogue between himself and a bootlicker. He says, "Bootlicker, haven't you heard the hadith to only advise the ruler in private?" Angry emojis. Daniel says, "Oh, there's a hadith that says if the ruler abolishes the Sharia and forces kufr laws, allies with kuffar to kill Muslims, implements social reforms to push believers into liberal atheism, we should only express disagreement in a private meeting with him." Laughing emojis. Bootlicker, angry silence. So here he's labeling somebody a bootlicker because they're concerned with Daniel talking about the Muslim ruler publicly. He's mentioning a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So what does Daniel do? Daniel represents them as a bootlicker for trying to follow a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, for showing some concern. Wait, what about this hadith? What about what our deen teaches regarding this issue? No, Daniel calls such people a bootlicker, which really just think about the implications of such a thing. And then he lists all of these things about the ruler. What is he hinting at? What is he implying regarding a ruler that does all of these things? And you see, this is the issue with Daniel, is his dishonesty and his straddling the fence. He'll have all of this rhetoric all over the internet implying that the Muslim rulers are actually disbelievers. They're kuffar. He has rhetoric clearly saying that the conditions for khuruj have been met. But then he'll go and say, I'm not making takfir of anyone in the government. I am not calling for khuruj. And this is the dishonesty of Daniel HAQIQATJOU, and this is what led to that whole event at the AIM conference. Because when Daniel is with the Salafis, he leads them to believe he's a Salafi.
Explicitly, we are clear that we here at AIM, including our brother Daniel and us, we stick to the Athari Aqidah, the Aqidah of the Salaf al-Salihin, whether you want to call it the Hanbali Aqidah because the Hanabala were there to support it and defend it, or you want to call it the Salafi Aqidah because that was the Salaf were upon. Doesn't really matter. That Aqidah based on the Quran and the Sahih Ahadith and the Sunnah and the way of the Salaf al-Ummah, this is what we are all upon explicitly.
When Daniel's with the Deobandis, he leads them to believe he's a Deobandi.
Most number of ulama are the Deobandis, mashallah. So I am a complete fan of that movement, and I've had Deobandi teachers, multiple teachers. So I'm standing them. I'm a fanboy, no doubt about it.
When he's with Hizb ut-Tahrir, he says he supports Hizb ut-Tahrir.
Hizb ut-Tahrir, I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Their mission of pursuing the Khilafah, this is something that is good. This is something that all Muslims need to be supporting.
And lately, we've definitely seen an influx in the takfiris supporting Daniel and promoting him and the things that he's saying. And Daniel's ties to takfiris is nothing new. This was from the main concern and criticisms he received when he published his review about Yaqeen Institute. The main two pieces of criticism he received back then was his ties to takfiris as well as his dishonesty. But still, over the years, even though there were these question marks about Daniel, we wanted good for him, we had high hopes for him, we saw a lot of potential in him. And likewise, that's why he was invited to the AIM conference. Some of us saw this behavior from Daniel and we wanted to disassociate. However, Imam Kareem, he wanted Daniel to be Salafi so bad. That's why he sat him down and told him to repeat after him.
Repeat after me, please. I am Daniel HAQIQATJOU.
I am Daniel HAQIQATJOU.
Follow the Quran and Sunnah.
And follow the Quran and Sunnah, inshallah.
Based on the understanding of the first three great generations of Muslims.
Based on the understanding of the first three generations of Muslims.
And I don't call people to rebel against the ruler.
And I don't call for people to rebel against the ruler.
And I don't make blanket takfir of anybody.
And I don't make
and
blanket
I actually
takfir.
say leave this to the ulama.
I don't make blanket takfir of anyone. I say leave this to the ulama.
And if I've done this in the past, I repent.
And if I've done that in the past, I repent to Allah.
Okay.
Imam Kareem has been defending Daniel. Because when Daniel talks to Imam Kareem is convinced that he's a Salafi. And that's why things just spiraled out of control at that conference. Because when Daniel is put on the spot like that, he can't appease all of his audience at the same time like he constantly tries to do. But one thing that was beneficial about that interaction is you had Imam Kareem condemning this idea that people are bootlickers due to their concern when it comes to publicly criticizing and creating animosity against a Muslim ruler.
See, rebelling has different types. Al-kalam, when you incite resentment and hate for the rulers, that's a form of rebellion. It doesn't mean that you are a bootlicker. That's how they like to use these terms. Bootlicker, you know what that means? Boot is like the shoes, and in reference to basically your when they are wrong, when the hukam are wrong, it doesn't mean that.
So at the AIM conference, Daniel sits there and doesn't raise any objection. Meanwhile, at home on his live stream,
there is no problem calling them bootlickers. That's actually a gentle, polite thing to say. We're not going to change our language to make it more polite when they deserve to be called much harsher things, actually, for the kinds of crimes that they're doing.
And you had Sheikh Ibrahim come up and make it a point to sit next to Daniel and explain the proper understanding of these issues.
Quick 2 points, inshallah. When it comes to the subject of al-inkar al-alani al-wala, to publicly criticize the rulers. The way of the Salaf, Ridwanullahi alayhim, they don't make inkar, they don't openly, what's the word inkar? Condemn the ruler with their names publicly. But they make inkar or condemn the haram that is being practiced. So if, for example, the ruler issue that is zina is halal, this and that, the banks, interest banks are haram, are halal, things like this, is to rebuke this and to say that this is haram, but without mentioning the name of the ruler publicly. And this is what the ulama are upon, and the mashayikh are asked, Sheikh Ibn Baz and Sheikh Salih al-Fawzan and the like of this, because this is the way of the Salaf, but not to confuse both.
So here the Sheikh is explaining that you condemn the haram without mentioning the ruler himself, which is exactly what many of us did regarding Halloween in Saudi Arabia specifically. For example, this is a podcast that I shared on my YouTube channel where two students of knowledge living in Riyadh, living in the city where that event took place, publicly condemn and denounce it. However, apparently according to Daniel, that's not enough. Unless you publicly criticize the rulers specifically, you're a bootlicker. Knowledge North publicly shared a clip from this podcast to which Daniel said, "Look at the ignorance. All this brother said was Halloween is haram. That's not the issue in question. The issue in question is it is haram for a Muslim government to sponsor and promote Halloween festivities. Let's see the bootlickers say that publicly." So the issue was never Saudi Halloween, as Daniel keeps deceptively repeating, because many of us condemned Saudi Halloween. Daniel just wants us to publicly criticize the governments. But next, the Sheikh addresses Daniel's claim that, well, I don't live in those countries, so why shouldn't I criticize them?
So there is a justification for you to go with the program if you're living in those countries. But why do you have to go out of your way to silence others? Like, they're not my rulers.
And the other issue, which is just a sincere advice to myself and everyone, whether we are here or elsewhere, people can get easily affected by words we say. So if you are in the United States and you openly criticize a ruler with his name, even you don't give the Pledge of Allegiance to him, but others are listening and they can act upon what they hear. So we don't want to be part of any fawda or evil or things of that nature, since we're all in a small world, if it's correct to say.
Here, Sheikh Ibrahim breaks down the whole issue. And not only does Daniel not call the Sheikh a madkhali, rankhali, bootlicker, agent, even though he expressed the exact belief of so many of the people that he's slapping that label on, but after the conference he even goes on Telegram and says, "I said very clearly, we will not stop doing public inkar of the munkar, no matter who it's from, ruler or non-ruler. There was no objection from the panel." So let 1,000 bootlickers scream in their rage, we're still smiling. Not only is he blatantly lying, how can you say there was no objection from the panel? He clearly called away from so many of the things that you are doing and calling for. But not only is he dishonest as usual, but he's also immature and childish and insulting, saying, so let 1,000 bootlickers scream in their rage, we're still smiling. And then the Harvard graduate goes on to share memes such as this. So no matter how many times Daniel dishonestly claims that people's issue with him is simply that he condemned Halloween being celebrated in Saudi Arabia, it doesn't make it true. All it does is prove that he's being dishonest. And furthermore, this lie that we're all calling him a khariji for denouncing Saudi Halloween and saying that he should be killed and his blood is halal. This is also a blatantly dishonest misrepresentation. I clearly said I am not labeling Daniel to be from the Khawarij, and I even took it a step forward in case anyone wants to challenge that. I said even if I said he was from the Khawarij, that doesn't make his blood halal. And for the record, to be abundantly clear, I am not saying Daniel is from the Khawarij. And hypothetically speaking, even if I did, there's two things to consider. Number one, the Khawarij are not kuffar. They are a dangerous, deviant sect from amongst the Muslims, but they are still amongst the Muslims. And number two, their blood is not automatically halal. On the contrary, it's the Khawarij who label Muslims to be disbelievers and make their blood halal. But the lying victimization just doesn't stop, as we can see here.
I asked the Madkhalis, do you think our blood is halal? The silence was deafening.
Was the silence deafening? Because Knowledge North clearly posted on Twitter, Daniel should not be executed for any accusation of Kharijism. However, he should be flogged for being such a liar and get a trophy for playing the victim. And the irony of the whole situation is that even though people are going out of their way to say we're not labeling him to be from the Khawarij, we are not saying his blood is halal, he is clearly and unambiguously calling people bootlicking agents, rankhali medkhalis.
Many Madkhalis are agents of governments.
His rhetoric led a YouTube channel that he himself publicly promoted to label me an FBI agent. And none other than Ali Dawah could not miss this opportunity to slander me in public. He posted clips from Daniel's video and pinned a comment saying, full video exposing these government agents. And to be fair, Daniel did later condemn this thumbnail, accusing me of being an FBI agent. But you see, this is the issue. There's so many mixed messages being spewed everywhere. Just like Daniel was so adamant about Omar Suleiman being held responsible for all of the rhetoric that he was spewing that was being used to spread liberal ideologies amongst the Muslims, to normalize LGBT, even though Omar Suleiman did go on record saying these things are haram, saying we can't support anything that goes against the Quran and Sunnah, it wasn't good enough because Daniel understands you have to look at somebody's actions as a whole. Likewise, if Daniel is going to spew a bunch of takfiri rhetoric, why is it then sufficient for him to just say, I'm not making takfir? If Daniel is unambiguously saying things like, all the conditions for khuruj, according to ulama, have been met, then why does he think he can just simply say, oh, but I'm not calling for khuruj? This is the issue with Daniel. And this is the same kind of cognitive dissonance that Daniel has criticized so many other people for. For example, Daniel says this.
If you're abolishing the law of Allah, you're abolishing for everyone in the country as the ruler, then, the scholars are very clear. The Quran is very explicit in Surah Al-Ma'idah and elsewhere that this is kufr. This is kufr that takes you out of Islam.
So you see statements like this from Daniel, which he's no stranger to. He will frequently imply that Muslim rulers are actually disbelievers, and his audience will clearly understand that from his rhetoric. But then he'll try to cover his tracks and say,
and so we don't need to be in the business. And as a general policy, we're not going to make takfir and say, okay, this ruler is a kafir, this ruler is a kafir. People might have a problem. The other side is going to have a problem with that as well.
Yeah, so he's not going to say that they're kuffar. To him, apparently, describing them as kuffar, saying that if a ruler does all of these things, then they are disbelievers, and certain rulers are doing all of these things, but he's not going to call them a kafir. To him, apparently, that's like the middle balanced path. And then he goes on to say,
we'll just leave it, because we're lay people. We're not scholars. We have no authority. So there's no reason for us to go to that extent.
So they're lay people. They don't have that authority. They're not going to go to that extent. Although recently all of his da'wah is about publicly condemning rulers as if he does have authority, as if he is some sort of a scholar. What is his audience going to think about what he's saying? It seems quite clear that he's describing all of them as being kuffar, but he's just not going to say it out loud. But he will say,
we just affirm in no unclear terms that if you're going to abolish the Sharia of Allah, you're going to enforce secularism, you're going to put social policies into place that are literally taking Muslims out of Islam step by step and destroying the next generation of Muslims, this is kufr. This is kufr. We're going to be clear cut about that.
So he says these things, right? And then he wonders why people get like a takfiri vibe from him. I mean, I don't know what he thinks somebody who was from the Khawarij or somebody who was a takfiri, I don't know what sort of speech he thinks that they would be spreading and promoting. But I would hope, he's bright enough to know that it coincides with so much that he's saying. And when that's the case, it's not sufficient to just say, oh, but I'm not making takfir. Just like you wouldn't accept when people like Omar Suleiman would say LGBT is haram. It wasn't good enough for you. So why are you holding yourself to a different standard?
Well, as the famous expression goes, if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, it's probably a duck.
Well, what about the issue of khuruj? What have they said about khuruj?
But you can find clear statements. Like if you ever read Shaykh al-Uthaymin's commentary on Riyadh al-Salihin, in the second volume, what he says about the rulers and at what point the ruler has to be removed, all of these conditions have already been met.
Wow, so 1 minute it's like they're not like scholars, you know, it's like above their pay grade to talk about these things. Yet here you have somebody, does anyone know who this person is? Abu Lut, saying, according to Sheikh Ibn Uthaymin rahimahullah, he's speaking on behalf of the Sheikh, saying all the conditions for khuruj have been met.
And he's very clear. I don't want to mention it. Maybe the video will get taken down.
Oh, he doesn't want to mention it because the video could be taken down. MashaAllah, real warriors here, guys.
But Sheikh Uthaymin rahimahullah was very clear. If the ruler does X, then Y needs to happen. In very unambiguous terms.
Yeah, Ibn Hazm as well, more classical scholar, he also has like certain conditions that things like the ruler is collaborating with the enemies of Islam and is working with them or is like housing their soldiers, things like this that has been happening. Like, and Ibn Hazm, what does Ibn Hazm say? Like, no, this justifies not just criticism, it justifies rebelling against the rulers. So
here Daniel is saying that according to scholars, the rulers of today have already done things that justify khuruj. So of course all of this sort of rhetoric, it is going to appease the takfiris and the kharijis. But don't worry, Daniel is going to say, we're not calling for khuruj. That way he can try to please everyone. I believe there's a term for this called plausible deniability, when really it's just cognitive dissonance. But we're not done yet.
These quote-unquote rulers in the Muslim world, they, in what sense are they rulers? Because they are arguably just puppets. Arguably, they don't have the final say. If, one of these rulers makes a decision but is opposed by their handlers in Washington, D.C., or their handlers in Tel Aviv, or in China, or wherever, they, obey. So are they really the rulers, or are they actually these puppets? And the control is actually coming from non-Muslims, these non-Muslim powers.
So here Daniel is describing these quote-unquote rulers as puppets. Are they even really rulers? Or are they just puppets for the kuffar? Is it really khuruj if they're just a bunch of puppets? So, I could make this video hours of just going through the stuff that Daniel has said on Telegram that are blatant lies and childish, immature name-calling. But this is the truth, and these are some of the reasons why people like myself wanted to make it clear that I don't approve of this type of behavior. I don't want to be associated with it. But just to give you one more example, this is something that he shared the same day he posted his most recent video. He says, exactly as predicted, Madkhali is turning on Brother Sajid. Allah free our brother Sajid from their clutches. Ameen. And here he's referring to our brother Dr. Khalid Green, sharing a video that has some really nasty, racist undertones, calling Khalid Green a house Muslim, portraying him defending his master. Talk about vile, nasty speech. Subhanallah. But then the dishonesty comes in, because this is a short clip from a video Khalid Green posted over 3 weeks ago. In that video, he showed a bit of concern regarding something I said, but the very next day, he posted a clarification about it. And in this video, he retracted what he said. Again, this was over 3 weeks ago. But this is just another example of the dishonesty and the nastiness. And like I said, there are so many examples, but we don't want the video to be too long. Allah knows best. May Allah guide all of us. JazakumAllahukhairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.